Hello and welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me Winterjaye. If you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
I'm Winterjaye. I am art director for Art Talsorian Games, but I also have a side hustle that I also do art direction for Chaosium part time. Mostly I just work on RuneQuest, though I've had a little bit of dabbling with my game that's close to my heart, Pendragon. So there is that.
Yeah. So tell me about how you got your start in the business. You're someone that's been working in tabletop for a really long time, and I have seen your name just in so many different books. But I'm like, who is this person? Looked online, didn't find very much. So if you want to talk about like where'd you start?
Started like most people, as a fly on the wall in a game shop, a comic and game store back in the 90s. And it was called Ancient Wonders. It's not around anymore, sadly. But they always considered me sort of an employee there because I would jump up and help customers after a while because I can't stand not to like be sitting on my hands. Like I can't sit still. It's not happening. So after that, I somehow got to know some folks that were working up at Wizards of the Coast, and I moved north from Portland, Oregon to the Seattle area and picked up a job there. I was doing mostly kind of business management stuff for a very long time there, well, a few years there, and ended up getting laid off and rehired there a few times, and the classic holiday layoffs that everybody loves so much. And it just kind of went on from there. I never really took my finger out of comics and games. I love it. And so I continued to keep abreast of what everyone was up to. At one point, I got to know Mr. Mike Pondsmith, of course, and I had no idea he was like the super famous guy. He was this friend of mine. And then I went to a convention with him, and it was like, well, okay, let's look at this. This is interesting. But at one day he came to me and he said, "You're miserable at your tech job. What would you like to do? What's your dream job?" And I said, "I don't know. I kind of like to be an art director someday. I love art. I do art, and I love artists." He goes, "Done." And from that point on, I've been ensconced into the brethren, if it were.
How long have you been doing that for?
Oh, art direction?
Mm-hmm.
It's been at least 5 years, 4 or 5 years, I think. I have a brain that is cut in half by pre and post COVID now. That's like, I guess COVID is just happening and it's still going on, but it really was 3 years ago.
Wow. Okay. I see
Yeah.
some of the work that you did was right before the onset of the pandemic. Does our Talsorian Games have like an office that you used to go to and things like that, and then you move fully remote, or how did that work for you?
No, actually. Well, they had an office. They do have an office. They had an office. They changed offices at some point, and they've got a new office now. But yes, there is an office where people who live in that area do get together. I was never one of those because I was always working full time somewhere else until about
Mm.
a year ago. So I had a job in tech. I was a senior UX designer, and that's a lot of fun, but it wasn't my heart's calling. So I rearranged my entire life so that I would have a much lower fiscal responsibility so I could do this more full time. And that's also why I have two jobs.
It's such a common story in tabletop is that people definitely need a job to pay the bills while they're pursuing their passion, and then eventually maybe they take the pay cut and then they go into tabletop in order to pursue something they love for much less money because there's genuinely not as much money in tabletop as many people have expressed on this podcast before.
That's true.
Have you seen talking about your UX design experience, how long did you do
Yeah.
that for? Was that over 10 years or like 5 to 10 years or something like that?
Yeah, it was over 10 years, at least
Okay.
15 years that I did that.
Okay.
And I was a UX designer before we knew what those were, so we just say digital graphic design is what we would
Okay.
say. But then all of a sudden, I applied for a job and I was trying to explain to them what I do, and she goes, "No, you're a UX designer. You're a user experience." I was like, "That's a thing."
Yeah,
So
it's
that was news to me. I feel very old talking about this like somebody.
well, I'm not trying to do that to you.
No,
But
you're not doing it. It's all me. It's all me.
no, that's super cool. What are some of the things then? Are you allowed to talk about like what some of the companies or like the products that you've worked on as far as like UX?
Oh, yes. I worked with Microsoft for a long time, and I I did work with Microsoft, and I did work with T-Mobile. At Microsoft, I worked on HoloLens, and I worked on before that I was working on games for Microsoft Games division, and I did some work with Xbox. So there was all kinds of different things going on. At the time, it was easy because HoloLens was in the gaming division for a while. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know what the use was going to be, and this was back when it was being developed. So I got to work on HoloLens, and I got to run apps for HoloLens. Then I got to just wander the halls and go, "Hey, I have nothing to do on Friday for 3 hours. Does anybody need anything?" And so there's a ton of games that I got to do some UX design work for, and websites that I got to do UX design for. Yeah, it was an
That
interesting experience.
that makes sense that of all the things that you could do in UX, you did the most cyberpunky thing. That's like digital displays like over 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Like, wow, that's
yeah,
shoe in. You were a shoe in for this. Okay, that makes sense. Dang.
that's awesome.
Yeah, for you moving from one industry to another, what would you say like are the major parallels and differences between like working for a tech company and then working for tabletop? Like as far as like your personal experience as a person, we don't necessarily have to say anything that would catch somebody a charge, but
Well, I can speak about my life working for corporations as just one big lump, and then nobody's getting called out, right? In the large corporations, I was not heard. I was always in tech. I was always on an engineering org because that's where my skill set is. I speak engineer, and I have a pretty good understanding of programming and those kinds of things and how it affects UX, but I was never really heard. I spent a lot of time taking on more responsibility, but never getting the title or the cash. And being a woman in tech is difficult. 10 years ago, it was even more difficult. And I'm not saying that women now don't have a challenge because, dear goodness, y'all do. And I wish the best for you so that you can get what you deserve. But I spent a lot of time whispering in men's ears and convincing them that my idea was their idea so the idea could get done. I don't have that now. Both the companies that I work for now are very, I don't even want to say progressive and women forward. It's equity. That's what I want to say. It's equity. If I have an idea, the creative director, say from that works on RuneQuest, which is the game I work on for Chaosium, he will be like, oh, that's interesting, and he'll tell me the little things in the idea that are wrong because of the history of the game and the flavor of the game, right? But we'll still adopt that idea into the piece of artwork or sometimes even into the text. So I feel more heard, and being at our Talsorian games is Lisa Pondsmith is there. There's already sort of a history of women are running this company there. She kicks ass over there, and she definitely, legal contracts and battle fighting and all of the things that need to get done behind the scenes. She's the one. She's the whole
yeah.
backstage team. So
Is she I'm not familiar with you said Lisa?
yeah,
Uh
she's
it
also on the cover of the Witcher, the original Witcher tabletop book. It says Pondsmith and Pondsmith. Everyone assumes that's Mike and his son. It's not. It's Lisa and her son
Oh,
did
okay,
that book
okay.
together. Yeah.
Wow,
So
super
Cody
cool.
was the lead developer on that, and Lisa was the co-lead developer on that.
Yeah. How many and not to speak about like yeah, obviously in the company you're in there's a fair amount of representation perhaps. But you would say that when you started, we were talking about off air like in the 90s, right? There was almost no representation from women in tabletop, right?
Yes.
Nowadays is it like 30 or 40% in most environments that you work in?
It's hard to say only because I'm not at any of these companies physically.
Right.
So I
Okay.
can't really look at the whole staff. I mean, you can't look at the whole staff of Chaosium, but I did get to go to a summit last year that was just before Chaosium Con. It's just like a 7 day just for the employees, and there were quite a few women there. There's still in terms of in general, women in leadership roles is still from my personal experience. This is armchair experience, so I could be wrong, but there still seems to be very few women and people of color in those positions from my experience. And also, very few trans folks, though I do find a higher concentration of trans people in games in general. Like it's just
Yeah.
like people seem to flock to this,
Yeah.
and it seems to be, from my experience, not being a trans person, it seems to be more accepted. I'm sure that you and other folks probably may have had different experiences than I have, but I try to be very, I try to look out for everybody, I guess is what I'm saying there. But
Yeah, I think for me in my experience, it's been that role-playing games for me was a way to explore my identity, even when I was very little and before I understood what I was
oh
doing.
yeah.
And that was like a
Mhm.
formative, safe space for me to explore being a woman before I knew what that was, before anybody knew it. Like there was no, I was like raised in a household that was very anti-gay, so I
Oh,
was never exposed to any sort of thing like that, and I never even known that trans people were a thing until like I don't know, like honestly, like Caitlyn Jenner.
yeah.
So it was, yeah, it's been kind of a roller coaster. And what the thing for me, like when I was like about to transition out of the military, was I started to get more involved in tabletop because I was like really interested in it and I wanted to pursue it as like a hobby and a part-time gig maybe. And I started having more relationships built with queers, and I started talking more with trans people. And the more I talked to trans people, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That I can totally understand how you would feel that way. And I feel that way too. And then after a while, I was like, wait a second, like, wait a second, you're telling me that I feel the same way as a trans person, in their worldview and everything. Also, the audience can't see because we don't record video, but my Alfonso Mucha tapestry that I have hanging up. Would you believe that I bought that when I thought that I wasn't trans? Like, like that's how deep the layers go.
Oh,
Okay, like
right.
I'm deep
Completely,
down in
completely
there.
get it.
Yeah, I
Well,
was
I'm
deep in the
really
closet.
glad that you found your way, because that is not an easy thing to do when you have nothing around you to kind of understand what it is. And I think there's a lot to be said for people who have had to pioneer that on their own.
Yeah, yeah. I've thankfully had a lot of support from some really wonderful people in my life during my formative period when I just first came out and I had made that decision to. And I just wouldn't have developed my career to even to this point. Being a full-time person, employed, running games and running the projects that I am without the support of these people who were very accepting of who I am. So I'm very thankful for that, especially the women that I sought to connect with after I kind of came out, and I was very interested in making those connections and friendships with more women because I was very interested in learning more about the femme experience. So
That's fantastic. Good for
yeah,
you. I'm glad. I'm glad things are progressing. Sometimes they digress, but we
yeah.
try to keep them going forward as much as we can.
I want to talk about like your schedule as an art director, if that's okay. Um, what's like a normal like work day and like work week normally for you?
Right now, it's interesting because we are getting up pretty early in the morning to have meetings with people that we do licensing from who are in another country. So, to be respectful of their time. And so that's happening. And then oftentimes I'll have a morning meeting with either our Talsorian or Chaosium folks just to kind of touch base or talk about what's been going on. And then I spend the day on the internet, on email, either looking for new artists or writing art scripts or progressing a piece of art that's already been assigned to somebody, or just I answer a lot of email all day. It's really good I type fast, otherwise I would be screwed.
Yeah. Is it okay if I plug a couple of my artist friends to you? So I'm just
Love, please do.
shamelessly plug. Yeah, I'm gonna DM you these art stations to you real quick.
Good.
But I've worked with both of these artists that I'm sending you right now, and they are fantastic. We are very excited to be working with both of them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yorsi and Matt. But yeah, so I am kind of interested in like what it is that you do like when you're I've worked with an art director before, and after working with someone who was doing a little bit of art direction, I was like, yeah, I what I was doing previous to what the art director was doing was just like trying to get by. It wasn't doing a good job. It was just like, I'm just kind of here, and like I kind of know what to do, but like it's a whole thing. So when you take and I want to go, if it's okay with you, step by step on like on a piece from conception to like.
I'd love to. Before we move on with that, I'd love to address what you just said. I think it's really key and important. In the gaming industry, especially tabletop, we're all basically in, a lot of us are in like garage businesses, it's a passion. And so we've come up with an idea and now we're making a game and a few people like it. So we have enough money to make it, to continue. And then the job of art direction just kind of falls on whoever wasn't fast enough to say no. And it's sort of a place that is like dark and scary for a lot of people because they're, I even get told often, you're the only one here who can speak artist, like, wow, just thought they were people, but okay, cool. That's great. That's a skill I didn't know I had. But I think it's important that we talk about that because it is a whole job on top of the job that you're doing now. And it takes a lot of time. And most of your money for a book is going to be spent on the writing is very important. The writing is probably not going to cost you as much as the art. If you're doing like a 20% art line, which is common in a book, it's not going to cost you as much. So the fact that very expensive outlay of cash and time and effort is kind of just sort of thrown on somebody who goes, oh damn it, I didn't say not it fast enough. I think if you are struggling to do that job, there's a reason. Don't feel bad about yourself. It's not an easy job to do.
Yeah, actually, funny that you say that because in that way, I actually am acquaintances, like friends with Lou Anders, who was an art director for a really long time for various magazines and stuff. And that's how he got the job, is because nobody wanted to do it. And he was just there. And then he eventually became like this award-winning art director.
Yeah, that's how it goes. But luckily he had some experience in his past life, right? So he could actually tackle that with a little bit of foreknowledge. But usually the person is standing there and where do I even look for artists, and
Yeah.
then it's really hard to be consistent. And the number one thing you need as an art director, yeah, you need an eye, but you have to be organized. And people don't associate people who are organized with art. They associate, flaky artists, like that's like a whole thing, right? But to be so meticulously organized and knowing the material really helps. But if you don't know the material, know somebody who knows the material and have opportunity to speak with them. So I've got lists upon lists, checklists coming out my nose. I mean, you can probably see them now. Just to keep us organized, like just so that I know what I'm doing during the day. Anyway, I
Yeah.
wanted to just address that because I think it's important if you're talking about sort of the gig economy, and someone's getting stuck as art director. Yeah.
Yeah, that's well, it's funny, yeah, because Lou was telling me that thankfully he had some friends who were art directors that he really heavily leaned on until so he did like on
Good.
the job training with like his friends essentially that he'd made in like the industry in order
Yeah.
to like be able to do the job well enough to be able to do it on his own at one point. Eventually, he got to the point where he was doing jobs without any help, and then eventually they just made him the art director because of that. So yeah, that was his progression with it. But yeah, for conception to actual like print, we start with the writing, perhaps. In most
Yeah.
projects, I would believe. And then we go from there. What does that look like from you receiving from, I believe, the narrative designer would normally do that, or maybe whoever the producer is for a book? What does that look like for you?
It isn't always that we have a finished, beautiful manuscript that we're working from. Sometimes they're just ideas. But the problem being that writing tends to take a little less time than does the artwork. So each individual piece of artwork, if it isn't a cover, covers are special children. Each individual piece of artwork, in general, takes about 14 days to complete for the artist, right? And that's back and forth in the email and getting approvals and all of that kind of stuff. And it can take longer if there's extra approval layers or whatever. sometimes I go in and I write all the art scripts. I mean, oftentimes I'm writing all the art scripts and then getting those approved by whomever is directing that project, whoever is the sort of project lead on that book, right? Or even I'll have to get an approval on the art script from the creative director of that line, as well as the person who's working on the line. And then I search for an artist who has the skill set that I'm looking for. So, for instance, most artists are not going to be working on both Witcher and Cyberpunk, or Chaosium's RuneQuest and Cyberpunk, right? Those are three entirely different skill sets. So I'll go looking for an artist. I make an initial contact with them. I ask them if they're available, if they want to do some work on it. Oftentimes they say yes. Then there is an NDA to be signed. And then after all of that, getting their information, getting the NDA signed, then I can actually send them the art script and discuss with them pay and all of that kind of stuff. Then I write a contract. Not all art directors write contracts. Some art directors are intimidated by having to write legal text. I get that. Completely get it. I, for some stupid reason, decided I would jump in and do that. So then once that's done, they give me a rough sketch of what they described. And oftentimes I will just look at that rough sketch myself and get some changes to it. Or I will send it to the lead, and we'll discuss changes over that piece of art, over that rough sketch. The second sketch I get, and that first sketch should be just blocking. We should just be seeing, how it's blocked out. Very rough, no color. The second one should have some more detail in it so we can see maybe clothing and what the building shapes are like. We can make sure that it is still working with the project. The third piece, that should be a color rough. I want to see a color rough to make sure the colors are working, and that's going to be mostly fleshed out. By now, we're not really doing as much, changing to the artwork as we are just making sure that the color's working and things are, that kind of gut even exists in Cyberpunk or, whatever it is, right? And then the final is just a knee-jerk, hey, does this look good to you, lead on the project? And they almost always say yes at that point. So, and then we pay them. And both Artel Saurian Games and Chaosium are excellent at paying artists. Artel Saurian is the person who does the paying is lightning fast. I mean, within days. Usually, if they have taken longer than 3 days to make that payment, it means something went wrong with the payment, because you're dealing with PayPal and applications and banks and stuff, and sometimes crossing country lines. So
yeah, that makes sense. That's great to hear. There was some discussion, and I understand if you veto this question. There was some discussion about artist rates pretty recently. Were you up on the Twitter sphere, hearing the bubble about that?
I was not. I don't actually do a lot of Twitter. It kind of drives me crazy. But
understandable.
I know some social media drive people crazy. That one's mine. However, I would be willing to go look that up because I'd like to see what people are talking about and what they're saying.
Yeah, I got involved in a conversation in regards to some rates that a different publisher was putting out for some of the work that they were commissioning, as far back as 2018, 2019, and some of the other rates, and what artists were publicly expressing that they were paid by this publisher, and they were, of course, not satisfied. And that is not an indictment of anyone's behavior from your publisher. But I wonder if your company has made any pay raises in the last while. I will say, for the record, your publisher was not mentioned. But I am curious if that is something that you all have been keeping a good eye on for pay rates. And I know that tabletop margins are so razor thin, and I know that intimately myself. But yeah, it's definitely a topic of discussion because some of these artists who are creating don't say out loud which one this is, but this artist right here was talking on Twitter about what they were paid, and it's that's I put a month into that, and it's not even gonna pay for 1 month's rent. So yeah, what's generally your stance, and what has your publisher? Do you have it? Are you aware of that? And how are your rates gliding up? I know MCDM is sort of out there as like the recent standard for writers, at least 25 cents a word, and they're very open about that. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what their artist rates are, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that. But
Well, it's interesting. Our rates have increased as over the 5 years that I've been there, and generally, our Telsorian Games is who I'm talking about now. Generally, they trust my judgment because I don't want to break the bank, right? I don't want us to be like, oh boy, we're never going to make any money on this because we spent $10,000 for every piece of artwork, you know. But I try to stay. The best thing that I can do is say right up front what the process is and what is the piece of artwork
Mhm.
worth. What am I paying? Right up, that goes right in the. I send an art script, which is a description of what the art is, and at the bottom of that art script is always sort of like the more technical stuff, like what size, what DPI, the ratio, you know, that kind of how many days I need it by, blah blah blah. And right at the bottom, the very last line, so they can find it easy, is, and we are offering X dollars for this piece of work. When I send that, I always tell them, if you need anything in this changed, just let me know. And I'm generally talking about the price. And I've recently had some negotiations with an artist who could not do the piece for the price I was asking. Their price for it, they could claim they can get paid so much more working in AAA title games than they can by doing tabletop. And so that relationship didn't work out. But a lot of times, if the artist knows up front, well, this is kind of what we can pay because we're a little company and our margins are razor thin, like you said. You know, sometimes they will meet me part way on those prices. But my number one concern is artists get paid. They get paid for their time. If I go in and I make some really, like, I get the rough sketch and then I get the color sketch and we're almost done with the piece, and then all of a sudden, I'm sorry, we have to change a bunch of stuff. The first thing I say to them is, I'm going to offer you more money, but we have to change this because of whatever reason. And that is not a decision I make lightly. And when an artist tells me I can, oh man, that's just below my pay rate, I'm like, I am really happy for you that you can command that much money. That's excellent. I can't pay that much. So I
right.
try to be as understanding as possible. And Artel Saurian really trusts me to sort of understand have my finger on the pulse of pricing out in the world.
I was so I'm doing, and I just went over the budget with my Kickstarter manager. You may know her actually if you've done a Kickstarter recently or been involved in it, but Anya Combs used to be the director of games at Kickstarter. But yeah, she's my Kickstarter campaign manager. So she doesn't work at
Name's
Kickstarter anymore.
familiar, but I don't know if I know her personally.
But yeah, I was going through like, and we're looking at doing like royalties and stuff for our writers and our artists and our other contributors. Is that something that our Telsorian Games has been looking at? And what do you think about a royalties pay structure, if at all that would be possible?
People who are individual contributors, we don't, that probably won't be entertained by our Telsorian games. If I mean, there are really special circumstances for that to happen because the margins are so thin, right?
Hmm.
We would prefer also that if you're working for money to put food on your table, that you get that money, you get it in your hand. And if you've got royalties, you're waiting a year or
Right.
2 years or however long before you can even get a hold of that money. So there is that. So yeah, that's not a thing. And I have no idea exactly how Chaosium does that. So I can't speak to that for them.
Yeah, I was curious about sort of new pay structures moving forward for me because I have a different business model than our Telsorian for a number of reasons, but for us going to like crowdfunding and stuff, I think we have a unique opportunity in some ways to provide royalties, at least on the pledges. I'm not sure about.
Mm.
I'll have to figure out like the sales aspect once we get past the Kickstarter and then figure out that path. And then also I was interested in. I've heard in the past that some people, either writers or not necessarily within tabletop, but writers or artists, sometimes get paid in advance of a certain amount. And then once enough units had been sold over a certain threshold, then they start to get royalties. Once it's like if it becomes a bestseller essentially. So
Right.
you're providing that like security to them with like a big paycheck up front, like our Telsorian Games does right now. And then you're also saying, hey, in the future, this may be like an additional $100 to $300 a month or whatever for you, which can be really helpful for like long term
Very
art.
much.
Yeah. So
Very
that
much. Yes. Wizards really treated their artists great because they didn't know what kind of a hit they had on their hands and they couldn't afford art. So they had royalties. And those artists, the early artists at Wizards made a lot of money. Some of them had that pay structure that you're talking about where it's here's a lump sum, a small lump sum up front to kind of get you going. And then once royalties start coming in, then you'll be getting those paychecks. And I've seen people for 20 years getting a paycheck for 36 cents or for right even beyond past when their card is being released because it's somehow in the contracts, right?
Yeah.
And they'll post online, I'm buying, and picture of their paycheck. It's always amusing. But yeah, there are lots of different pay structures out there, and I think Artel Saurian is firmly in the we're going to do freelance. We don't pay the most in the industry, but we're up towards the top
Okay.
of the pay structure for freelance art.
Gotcha. Yeah. Cool. And you did say, and for the record, you did say you are willing to negotiate with artists that you're talking with, to a certain degree, and like what makes sense for your budget. So
Yeah,
that's cool.
100%, 100%. Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think for the most part, artists are starting to find that it is very difficult to not starting to find, but have found
Yeah.
over a long, since art was a thing. It's difficult to make a full-time living being an artist, but passive income streams really interest me as far as like, this is my business podcast. So like we're talking passive income streams, that's what everybody says. It's like, you need to increase your passive income. That's all the clickbait ads. But
Yep.
it's true. Like if I was able to, for instance, if I was able to collect passive income streams on the games that I run for Start Playing Games instead of showing up to run a game, I would do that instead. like
And that's one of the things with Patreon, right? It's not as passive as it could be, but some
right.
people run it fairly passively. Maybe they're
Yeah.
just sending out a print of their artwork to their folks that they've created for some other purpose, right? Or whatever it is they have in their tiers. But yes, passive income, yeah, I'm in. I'm down. Let's get some passive income going. That would be great.
Yeah, I think honestly the one thing, if anybody who's an artist is listening to this, like you need to start a Patreon because there's going to be at least a few people out there, even if you have like you should provide some kind of rewards, like maybe even if it's just early access, which is what I provide on my Patreon if you'd like to support this podcast. Then you
Nice.
can then you can at least provide something to the people that want to support you because there's always going to be somebody out there that wants to give you their money and just to help you out because they enjoy your work. So I think putting yourself out there on Patreon is pretty important for artists, and not enough artists are on Patreon. There really should be. I know I've been working with and chatting with some of these artists on Patreon that are making content within tabletop, either maps or like just art or stat blocks and stuff like that. And that's really the future of like this sort of post controlled, tightly knit OGL world, is that there's so much opportunity for everyone to make enough to support a living in the future because everything has become sort of democratized by these platforms that allow you to be directly supported by consumers.
And if you have a Patreon, that shouldn't be your only income stream, right? That shouldn't be the only place where if you're doing that. I have a friend who runs she runs in the ferry circuit, right? And so she's got a Patreon and a YouTube and a Twitter, and she's got and she's got a channel here as well.
Mm-hmm.
She's got everything going on, and it all puts nickels and dimes into the piggy bank. And over time, those nickels and dimes have added up to being, quite a bit toward her being able to continue doing what she does. So I think it's important to diversify. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
portfolio exactly, but to diversify those income streams.
Yeah. I was part of a mastermind community for Devin Nash, who's basically runs one of the agencies that deals with new media. So like Twitch streamers and YouTubers and things like that. He's represents a Manarath and Pokimane, for instance. And a lot of other people does brand deals. He's worked with like everyone from like the Army to like I believe like Chevy or something. But that being said, the one thing that a lot of people, if you're like a young creator, they get sort of overwhelmed with the amount of things that they feel like they
Yes.
need to do.
Yes. I do.
And
I'm not a new creator, and I do.
And the number one piece of advice generally that is given by these the people like Devin Nash who are just dealing with these super successful creators is that you have to focus on one form of your hobby or your art until you plateau or you get to a certain threshold. And it's different for each type of platform. Like if you're
Yeah.
an artist on Instagram, it's going to be different than if you're a YouTuber. It's going to be different if you're a Twitch streamer. It's going to be different if you are on Patreon. And once you cross a certain threshold, then you can expand and syndicate content when you can afford to, more or less.
Yes, I love that. And that's really, really good advice. Also, you may already have some talent toward whatever art you're doing when you're starting out. You may already have an affinity for it, and that's probably true. But there really is no such thing as real talent. I don't believe in talent. Talent, that word just means you worked your ass off and you got good at something. And so, if we're talking about somebody like Yo-Yo Ma, the first time we ever saw Yo-Yo Ma, our jaws all hit the floor and we're like, wow, he is so good, but he didn't wake up that way, right? So focusing on your one type of artwork like you're talking about and getting really good at that, like I want to be a cyberpunk artist. So I need to make art that looks like cyberpunk, right? And so I'm not going to be working on knights and castles and dragons. I'm going to be working on this other stuff. Do all that other stuff for fun, right, to keep you inspired. But I think there is so much truth to what you're saying right now. That's really good advice.
Thank you. I try it. My entire platform is built on giving good advice, so I appreciate that. I've passed the bar. We hurdled the low bar here. I've given some good advice. Um, yeah, I was talking with one of my artists, Yorsi, about like how long they've been doing it, and they were like, "Yeah, it's been like I think 8 to 12 years or something like that." And it's like 8 to 12 years as a painter. That's a long time. And then I know Matt, for instance, is like so he's an instructor at an art school and like teaches this every day, and then also has spent probably about 20 years doing it, and that's how you get that sort of skill level where
Yeah.
I actually had Matt at one of our initial meetings and Matt was just like silent the entire time when we were just talking about the project initially. And he sketched a full like sketch of one of the characters and like presented it to us at the end of the meeting. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is this is amazing. So I'm in awe of artists. I really enjoy working with artists. And I think moving forward, one of the things that I am trying to sort of shore up and like tighten up for my processes is like making sure that I am keeping within the budget so that people get paid on time better. That's one thing that I
Yeah.
didn't do so well. It's my first project, so
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't do that as well. But I knew moving forward, like now that I know what this is like and like how things normally go, I can better plan and like project manage in that aspect. So yeah,
100%. You know what? Everything that we were talking about of like focus on your job for a while or whatever it is, like I want to be a cyberpunk artist or whatever, that goes for everything. I, as an art director, in 10 years, I'm going to be much better than I am now. 5 years ago, when I was starting out, I'm hopefully I'm better than I was when I started, right? So, and it's true for running a podcast. You didn't wake up one morning and have this amazing podcast. You probably had a good one, but over time, I bet you've really honed your skills. You seem like a very fluid kind of interviewer. So that didn't come from nowhere. That came from hard work and intuitiveness.
well, Winterjaye, if you'd like to hear the backstory of Friday and how Friday got good at
I
interviewing, actually.
spill the tea, baby.
So I actually this is deep lore. Okay, so this is deep lore on Dollars and Dragons. So I was a military recruiter for a while where I used to interview kids all the time. So back when I was in the Marine
Wow.
Corps, I was
I would
a
never
recruiter for
have
a while.
guessed that. Like that is
I'm
no.
too
All right, go on. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Please.
No, that's fine. I'm too big a queer now, so you can't clock me for you can't clock me as a Marine anymore. That's great. But yeah, so I spent a while in the Marine Corps. But yeah, I did spend a while in the Marine Corps as a recruiter, and I was work obsessed as I normally am. That's my personality, I think. That
Yeah.
which has to do with a lot of daddy issues, to be quite honest, and like feeling like my productivity is like my worth, which is not true. And I'm coming to
Sounds
like
like trauma. It sounds like trauma.
100% it is. I'm in therapy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but
Me
yeah,
too.
so
I get you. I get you.
yeah. So, I for a while I was like really obsessed about my job. I was the rookie recruiter of the year, and then I was the number one recruiter in like all of so our region was like Oregon, a little part of Washington, and Alaska. And then I was like the recruiter boss at a station, managing recruiters and making sure we made mission and everything after that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I got really good at talking to people, not because I necessarily was good at small talk, but because it was a skill to develop, and I developed that skill. And that's where I
Very
got
nice.
my start initially, I think. And then other various leadership roles. Of course, you have to talk to people often, and you have to communicate pretty often. I was an operations chief, and I did a lot of work as far as like communicating with other outside agencies, like at embassies and things like that. And it can be a lot when your job is just communicating. And that was just my job for a while, is like making sure I call people and send emails so that things got to the
Mhm.
places they needed to go. So that was my job for a while as well. So all of those skills kind of, I suppose, coalesce into now what we hear in this podcast, which is my seemingly natural state of being okay at interviewing people. But thank you for that.
That's good. Yeah, that's good, and you're right. Those, I mean, I'm a super organized person, but I really love art, and so that's now culminated into what I do now. It's all come together for me. And it sounds like you're kind of experiencing the same thing. Although I bet you never thought, you know what, in 10 years, I'm gonna be
I
running
didn't.
this podcast about games and
I really didn't. I think 2 years ago, or I guess it's almost 3 years ago now, when I was initially thinking about like kind of entering the space as I was exiting the military, I was initially drawn to like, hey, I like to watch D&D shows. I'll play in a D&D show. So I got onto a live play, and then I learned to DM after that, and then I started running my own shows, and then I ran some shows, and then
cool.
now I do some live play shows once in a while. But for the most part, I really found that I was more interested in deep conversations with people. And if I was to choose one aspect of my job right now that I love the most, it's definitely this podcast. I 100%
Great.
love it the most. It makes me the least amount of money though. um,
Good figure.
so if you would like to support this podcast, you may subscribe to patreon.com/isfriday and give me $5 a month. And then you can join the super secret category in my Discord, where you can get professional GM advice from my group of like-minded game masters who can help you earn a living wage within tabletop without being a game designer or a writer or an artist or an art director.
Awesome. Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
No, that's very
That's
interesting about you. I loved hearing that. That was great.
I am like kind of I don't know. I guess I'm an interesting person. I don't know. Other people say so. I'm just, uh,
Yours is just normalized to you, but it isn't
yeah.
normalized to someone who hasn't lived it.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's true for
Yeah,
all of us, I
yeah. Wait,
think.
for you being an art director, now that we're talking about like different people, this is totally gonna put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
All
But
right. I'm
we
okay.
could
I'm okay.
remove it if this is uncomfortable. How do you feel about diversity and what it does for art in a book, and like how do you approach that as an art director, finding artists from different backgrounds, and how would you recommend that people who are new to that role to finding people of different backgrounds? Like, what would you say about that? I know what advice I would give, but what would you say about that?
So it's really hard. It's really hard to find artists of different backgrounds because you're looking at someone's online portfolio and you've gotten an email. There's not a lot that you can tell from that. You can maybe try to like pinpoint the name, or maybe their writing is such that you can tell that their English is a second language or something like that. But I don't really have good advice on how to specifically pick out people of different backgrounds. Although what I do find is when I finally get to know people and we're past the formal stage, I think we have a pretty diverse group of folks. We've got some like the hardest artists to find for tabletop gaming art are female artists. Artists that identify as female. They identify themselves as female. That is not something that is easy to find because on art portfolios, you don't see pronouns he, she, pronouns they, them. You see a name, and oftentimes women have changed their name to sound more masculine. I did that for a long time so that I could get, because I couldn't get work in tech as being having a feminine name. So and my gender is I'm pretty gender fluid. I'm kind of all over the place. I don't expect other people to always understand where I'm at mentally. So I will go by whatever gender they call me. A lot of times people say he and sir when they're addressing me in emails. I'm fine with that. Or she, and sometimes I get they. It's good for me. But that's one of the things, that's one of the places that's difficult, is trying to figure out identifying female artists. But when I do find some and they are good, they keep getting work from me. That is a good way to encourage who are not like you to work on your product, is when you find some and you give them repeat work, they're going to tell people who are like them, who are their friends, to come. And I have this friend who's got this great portfolio just like you did earlier, and then I can go look at those portfolios, and if they're, if they have the right kind of style for whatever I'm working on, I'll hire them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially when they're trying to diversify their team, it can feel really intimidating. And that's
Yeah.
not necessarily a barrier that I've dealt with in a long time. I did deal with it initially when I was a new recruiter, like approaching, I was presenting as a man at the time. I was still in the closet, so I thought of myself as a man at the time. So approaching like women and like people of color was difficult for me because I'm white. So I
Yeah.
had to do it a particular way, but I ended up like recruiting a very percentile wise more than, and this is because I'm trans 100% because I knew how to talk to women. This, 100%, it was literally just, and this is what I attributed it to. Like when I was like, people would ask me, like the other Marine recruiters would be like, "Hey dog, how'd you recruit so many women?" Like, I don't know. I just asked them questions and then listened to them. that was it. Like, I asked them questions. I let them answer questions, and then said, "Thank you for telling me that." And here's what the
Yeah.
Marine Corps is, and then that was it. wasn't difficult. I think sometimes people put barriers in front of themselves through like the anxiety of it, because it's a new
Yeah.
experience, or it can feel like a lot. But
Well,
yeah.
one of my secret weapons is I'm Romany. So my heritage is my people for centuries and generations traveled all over. And rather than looking at picking up pieces of other people's culture, because that's what we did, as we travel somewhere, we would pick up a piece of their culture as almost a protective mechanism to sort of fit in enough to get through to go to the next place, right?
Hmm.
So I feel like it makes me uniquely qualified to sort of not be uncomfortable by that
Hmm.
kind of approach. And I only get uncomfortable if the person I'm talking to starts getting uncomfortable about it. And I'm like, oh gosh, if I said something, or, and then I'm trying to be very careful and not make it worse. But mostly I don't feel uncomfortable by those kinds of things. I just feel sad that I can't always locate, like Afrofuturism in art. My gosh, it's a huge movement, but it's not always easy to find people who are doing that work who are also people of color or
Right.
African American or of African descent, right?
Right.
So that's one of the things, is I just get sad that I'm like, oh, I wish I could have some more, because Mike Pondsmith is of African descent. So yes, we're very open to having people of different ethnicities working with us. Like, we want that.
Right. What do you think about open calls? Is that normally like too much work for you to sort through?
Oh no. Oh, there have been times when I've been like, I cannot find a cartographer. No matter what I do or how hard I try, I can't find one. And so then the person who was he's now the lead for, his name is Jay Gray. He's now the lead for Cyberpunk. But at the time he was the ambassador for social media, and he was like, "Put out an open call? Gosh, please, yes, please do." And so when I do that, yeah, I get a lot of folks who are like, "Wow, they didn't read the ad." Like, they're
Right.
doing, cartoons and kids stuff, and it's great, but it's not for us, right? And
Right.
then you'll find a couple that actually fit, right?
Super cool. Yeah, that's I just feel like if our Telsorian Games puts out an advertisement for an open call for artists, you're gonna get like 1,000 applications.
We did get a lot, both the times that we ended up doing that. We got a lot. That was overwhelming. But
Yeah.
I really needed cartographers. We were getting close to our deadlines, and I still wasn't finding anybody who was consistent. Or you can be the best literally the best artists on the planet. If you are not consistent and you can't communicate and you can't meet deadlines, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I'd sometimes find these people that were just mind blowing, but they just
Right.
couldn't.
Yeah, that's a similar theme that I've found in many of the tabletop adjacent industries, like
Yeah.
anything to do with shows, anything to do with writing. That's very true, and it's we're in the entertainment business. We're creating products. It has a deadline. Like you need to make the deadline, and
Yeah.
if you don't make the deadline, you need to let somebody know, and then a producer is going to come help you out. Like, or I don't know how
Yeah.
you do that on your end, but if an
We
artist like
tend
is
to be
late.
very, yeah, we tend to be very, I tend to be understanding. 90% of the artwork that I assign can have a fluid deadline because I'm doing an entire book, right?
Right.
And I'm not doing all 300 pieces of artwork at once, clearly, right? I'm
Hmm.
doing a section of them at a time. So the only time I ever say, okay, this is a hard deadline is when it's the last two or three pieces, right? And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, these we're going to print on X day. And then everybody gets that speech. Every single person who's got a piece of artwork that's out that isn't in yet and all of that, they all get that speech of, hey, this is our hard deadline. And I've only had once or twice at all the artwork I've ever done where someone really flew the coop and I caught it within like a week of like, okay, well, they're not getting back to me and I've reassigned the artwork. I just let them know politely I have to reassign them. It's
That's
heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking when that happens. But, our whole company is sitting on pins and needles and we're not making money if we're still creating this one book, right? Which means maybe some of our people may not get paid if we're not careful. So we've got to make sure we've got income coming in to make sure everybody's getting paid.
absolutely. It's super difficult to do a lot of stuff if like the timeline shifts too much. Because
Yeah.
then it puts everybody else behind. If the art and the writing isn't done by a certain amount of time, for the art director to make refinements and for the artist to go back and do the different drafts, then you're putting that
Yeah.
behind. Same reason that the writers, if you haven't done your redrafts from sensitivity consulting and also the narrative designer, then you're not going to meet the
Yes.
deadline to reach editing, and then editing after that goes to layout, and then that is where art and the writing comes together eventually during layout.
I
For
have decided as an art director, I just made this decision. I don't second guess the artists. What you tell me until I realize it's not true anymore if something like that ever comes up. And the other thing I want to say is that I am not your boss. I'm in a partnership with you. I want your brain. I don't want you to blindly do everything I tell you to do unless I have to because there's like some contractual thing with whomever we're licensing it from. And I say that. I say, I have to have you make sure this character looks exactly like this because I will say that. Most of the time, what I want your brain. I want you to think with me. If you look at the script and you go, oh, but I have such a better idea, tell me. Because you know what? You might be able to execute that. And then we've got a dream piece of art. And I just think that needs to be stressed. It's important to me.
It is, I think that's giving people grace when you're in a leadership position is pretty important,
Yeah.
because it can also, when you're remote, it can be very difficult to tell whether or not someone is going through a lot or is
Oh,
like having
yeah.
difficulty, especially in the freelancing market. I have always felt like when I'm running the project, and I'm sure it's true for your contributors, like you're paying them a lot of money, but it's still not where they're making all of their money. So it can be you're in kind of a
Yeah.
difficult position as a leader to like sort of absorb the stress of the impending deadline and then, just try to not push that out to them because that creates a very toxic work environment.
Yeah.
But
I had an experience actually with one of the artists where I didn't hear from him. He was in the middle of a piece of art and then I didn't hear from him for weeks and I was getting worried. It was during COVID. I was like, God, jeez, did he die? I mean, that was happening during COVID. If you didn't hear someone
mhm,
for a while, you had to wonder, right?
right.
And at one point, he got back to me. He's like, I'm so sorry. He's all embarrassed. He's just like sick to his stomach about the deadline and having missed it and that I reassigned it to somebody else and not mad at me about it, of course, but just sick
Hmm.
that he let us down. Little brother died and he was only 30.
Oh God.
And so, I can't really, I'm not mad about that. All was
Yeah.
forgiven. please communicate with me. Let me know what's going on. Oh yeah, that's a big deal. And I can understand why everything else just sort of dropped off your plate. Like you just kind of went nuts. I get it. I would too. And
Yeah.
so he still works for us and he's very consistent still, but that
Yeah.
one time something came up. So that's a big thing. As the art director and as the artist, you have to communicate. You just have to, even if it's hard, even if it's embarrassing, even if it makes you feel bad because you're letting someone down, you got to just let them down. You just got to tell them.
If we're gonna wrap with just some light advice, I know you've given a lot of advice to artists on this
Yeah.
podcast. What's some things that you would say for someone who has, for instance, we're not talking beginning artists. I mean, beginning artists, this might still be good advice for you, but we're talking about people who are trying to get up to that next level and they don't have a credit within one of the large tabletop books and they're looking to get one. What do they need to do that you're looking for in order to make your decision on whether or not you go with them?
That's an excellent question. I was actually hoping that we could get to that because one consistent issue that I find with people who submit a portfolio in both companies is that they don't have a lot of work that shows me that they can do that kind of work. So, for instance, I'm looking for cyberpunk artists, and they come on and they're like, oh, "I love cyberpunk. I've played it my whole life, and here's my portfolio link." And I go there, and I see a lot of Dungeons and Dragons style, and maybe a few cyberpunk pieces. That's difficult for me to tell whether or not you can do that work. So sometimes, if their work is good, if their work is, I don't mean good like it's better than other people's, but more like it's good in the style it would fit our title, like if some of their work is like that, I will often go back and ask for more stuff, but most art directors will not. You have 10 seconds where they go to your art station or whatever and they skim down really quick and maybe they click on one or two that might appeal to them. You've got 10 seconds. That's it. You need to have the work you love and want to do. You need to have that in there and everything else needs to piss off. Just
Gotcha.
take it out. Don't clutter up but that piece was so good and it was a really good picture of my grandmother, whatever. Get rid of it. Love you, grandma, but you got to go out of the portfolio. Go back on the wall where you belong because you only have that short period of time to get someone's eye to get more interested in you. If I look at like 25 portfolios a day every single day, I'm probably going to get really fast at it. I'm not going to be exploring to figure out who you are. The other thing is don't put things in your portfolio that you don't love doing. If you don't like making logos, I don't want to see them because the first thing I'm going to do is contact you to make a logo. Like I'm going to think, oh, it's making logos. I say that because we just got done doing Black Chrome and there are like 70 unique logos in here. And I had to go on this huge forage for artists that could do logos. So that's on my mind. But if you only like doing character design, show me character design. Don't just show me a single picture of one character in a place. Show me a character turn. Holy cow. Yes, it's tabletop, but I have hired 3 character turn artists over the last couple of years, and one of them has gotten about 30 character turns out of me for different products because they are so good at it. Show me character turns. Show me a page of accessories that character would have. Give me that story so that I understand that you understand.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You only want to put in your portfolio essentially what you think that you want to present to the work you're currently looking for. So you want to curate
Right.
it. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. And if you have a portfolio like ArtStation and it's like, oh boy, I'm kind of doing artwork for fantasy as well as sci-fi. You can put things in folders. You can find ways to present it so that it's easy for me to go there and go, oh, here's a sci-fi folder, great, and I can just click on it, right? That is to getting hired. And what do they say? Kill your darlings. I hate
Mhm.
phrases like that, but there's some good truth to that. Kill your but I love this piece, but it doesn't apply to anything you want to do. Kill it.
Mhm.
Get it out of your portfolio.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that sucks.
Yeah,
But
it sucks. I'm not gonna lie. I'm also an artist. I get that.
yeah, the thing that I think then is, do you recommend that they have like an official and like personal, or for their socials if they want, or what do you recommend there?
I think it's a good idea to keep some distance from your public persona. I mean, for instance, would be somebody who likes to play, I don't know, you like to play really dark games, you're really into Vampire V-Tests and Vampire the Masquerade or whatever, but you're doing work for your day job. You work specifically for maybe like religious organizations and Christian organizations. It's just kind of where you found your niche, right? They may not react well to seeing that you got all these posts about your role playing, and being a vampire and sucking people's blood. They may not react really well to that. It's a really
Yeah.
extreme example, but I think it
Right.
gets the point across.
Yeah, I think about that quite often because right now I work for myself, and
Yeah.
I have the benefit of being able to basically just say whatever the hell I want all the time, which is great, for better or
Yeah.
worse. But
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
it's great, but I understand that this is literally closing doors for me in the future because I know people are gonna look back at some of the things that I've either said or done, and that's perfectly okay. And choose to
Yeah.
just not work with me in the future. So, understanding that, I am embracing it in a way, but I know
Yeah.
that if you're out there and you're looking for work, then maybe you just shut the doors for a while until you have done the things that you'd like to do and you have more opportunities, essentially.
Well, I like the idea of having a personal and a public, because if I'm having a really bad day
Hmm.
and I'm really depressed and I'm sad and I just need to vent, I probably am not going to do that on my art director related public social media about, whatever thing is going on. Not just because it might hurt my job, but because it's a really personal thing. And I'm sorry, there's crazy people out there. You don't want to expose yourself to something that could potentially be unsafe. And as a woman, I that is on my mind all the time. That I've had stalkers. I've had scary stalkers. I've had stalkers that have threatened to SA me and threatened to unalive me and all of the other things, right? And so I don't want to take those chances. And I'm still trying to work out how to do that well for myself, because it's a lot of work. But if you can, I think it's safer to try to have something public and something private.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Mike Pondsmith taught me a lot about that, because of course he is so known in our industry, and he's had some crazy stuff happen too, and so he's very, very careful about keeping those two things separate.
Yeah, that it is definitely difficult, and I know from firsthand experience now. I sometimes get harassed because
Yeah.
I'm at the tipping point right now where I'm not gonna say I'm famous, but I don't know, people recognize me in the scene, and there are a
We'll
lot
say
of
you're
people.
getting there.
uh yeah, I don't know, I of all the people, for me to be surprised about who knew who I was, like the creator of Foundry, like when I messaged him, I was like, hey, yeah, I wanted to contact you about like the vineyard and like porting over the module or whatever, and he was like, oh yeah, Friday, I've been following you, and I was just like, you what? You know who I am? I use your platform like 15 times a week. Like,
That's fantastic when that happens. I love that.
it feels good, I'm not gonna lie, it feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Validating, like.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You're like, oh, that work I've been doing.
But yeah, there is definitely that aspect where now I'm starting to get people in my games now that are like, hey, I've been following you for like 6 months and I have been just waiting to play a game with you. And I'm just like, okay, we're not at the creepy stage yet, but we could get there pretty quick.
Keep your eye on it, right?
Yeah. And that isn't to say that anybody who has joined my game and said that to me, which is a lot of people, you're not being creepy yet. I would let you know. I kick people ruthlessly if they creep me out.
Oh,
So
good. That's good. Yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely a concern, and especially if you're gonna take one route, perhaps separate them if you can, and that's advice that I don't take for myself because I'm not in the same position as an artist.
Yeah.
I'm creating my own thing, so I can say whatever the fuck I want. So it's one of those things where I don't work for anybody, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I just work to not embarrass myself, more or less. But was there anything that you wanted to, as a parting shot, Winterjaye, that you wanted to bring out to any artists or any shout outs or any projects that you're working on that you wanted to bring light to? This should get posted I think May-ish, maybe June.
Let's see. I am very when I receive an email from an artist asking about work and such, I almost never just say no thank you. I try to give some direction, and I would hope that other people, I mean time permitting of course, but I try to give some direction on not their artwork, because their artwork and their style is their artwork and their style. But if they wanted to produce the artwork that we would need in our books, I give them direction on how to do that in some way. And I often get people who come back a couple years later and go, "Oh my gosh, look what I've been doing, that was helpful." And that's where my validation comes in, right? Is I don't remember doing that, but yes, sometimes I don't remember the person because they're just an email in my inbox, right? But it's really good to feel that. And I think if you're, no matter what kind of thing you are doing, if you are in a position to hire, giving some direction, gentle guidance, can really change somebody's life. You don't even know how it will affect them, or if they even take the advice or not, right? Which is up to them, right? That's no big deal if they don't. But if you can give them advice, just blanket give everybody advice. Consider yourself a mentor at that point. If you're doing any hiring, you're now a mentor, period. And so I try to treat everybody like that, and that's kind of what I hope to spread around as my word of the day.
Yeah, definitely. It is a very important and fraught with peril position to be in, to be a leader, and it's very easy to make mistakes. Being transparent about your mistakes and owning up to them is also equally important, as well
Oh my
as like.
gosh, yes.
But yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation, Winterjaye. I wish we had more time. If you're cool with it, and we've got something on the horizon for any of the developing studios any of the studios that you're working with, I would love to have you back if that's cool. You don't have to say anything right now while I have you on air, but just know that that's out there. But yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. Hi, thanks for listening. If you want to support me, you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/isfriday, or you can find some of the work that I'm doing at vineyardrpg.com if you want to pre-order the book that we made.